There's something you need to hear, and it might sting at first. You're not being blocked because you're unworthy. You're being blocked because you're gripping too tightly. Wanting something deeply isn't the problem. Needing it to feel whole, that's where it begins to break you. And I know that hits deep because we've all been there. That place where you're giving your all, staying up at night, wondering why the thing you're working so hard for just won't come. And somehow, the more you crave it, the further it slips away. You tell yourself, I just need this one thing and then I'll be okay. But that kind of need, it's not harmless. It twists your energy, clouds your mind, and quietly convinces you that your peace lives somewhere out there, on the other side of an achievement, a relationship, a moment that hasn't come yet. But here's the truth. The Stoics understood centuries ago. Need is the enemy of freedom. Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and real freedom doesn't come from getting what you want. It comes from needing less. When you stop gripping so tightly, when you stop tying your worth to outcomes, the tension breaks. And suddenly, you're not begging life to validate you. You're becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts what's aligned. So stay with me, because in this video, I'm going to walk you through why the less you need, the more you receive, and how to make that shift without losing your fire. We're not giving up our goals, we're letting go of the anxiety that's been blocking them. And if you find something real here, if this speaks to that quiet part of you that's been trying so hard just to feel enough, do me one simple, free favor. Hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing messages like this that bring us all back to what really matters. Let's dive in. It doesn't start with desperation. It starts with desire. You want something deeply, a relationship that feels safe, a career that finally rewards your effort, a moment of certainty that whispers, yes, this is it. That kind of wanting isn't wrong. It's human. It's what moves us forward, what gives us a reason to show up, to try, to care. Wanting is the seed of every dream, but somewhere along the way, the wanting crosses a line. It shifts quietly, without warning. What began as inspiration hardens into dependence. And that's when things begin to get heavy. Because when you need something to feel whole, your energy changes. You're not simply walking toward your goals. You're chasing them with the tight, anxious grip of someone who believes they'll fall apart without it. You're no longer asking life for possibilities. You're begging it to save you. And the worst part, the tighter you hold on, the more things slip through your fingers. Carl Jung once said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. And that's exactly what happens here. The more you need, the more resistance you create, not just in the world around you, but in yourself. You become tense, reactive, drained. And it's not because what you want is too far out of reach. It's because your desperation starts building walls between you and it. There's a quiet paradox in life. Nothing aligned with your peace will ever enter through panic. True alignment doesn't force its way in. It doesn't beg to be seen. It arrives in stillness, not struggle. And anything meant for you, truly meant for you, won't ask you to grip it until your knuckles turn white. It will stay, not because you chase it, but because you're ready to hold it with calm, open hands. But when you're caught in need, calm is the first thing to go. You start reading too deeply into silences, over-analyzing every delay. You're not listening to your life anymore. You're interrogating it, demanding answers it's not ready to give. And in that noise, you lose the one thing that could guide you back: clarity. Plato taught that the first and best victory is to conquer self. But how can you conquer yourself when you're being ruled by what you think you lack? That's the danger of need. It blinds you, not just to what you already have, but to the power you already are. You could be surrounded by care, by potential, by opportunities waiting for your attention. But if your mind is fixed on what's missing, you won't feel any of it. It becomes a loop. You need more to feel okay, so you chase more. But the chase only reinforces the idea that you're not okay as you are. The more you search for peace outside yourself, the more distant it becomes. And eventually, even when the thing arrives, the relationship, the job, the yes you thought would fix it, you can't relax into it. You're too afraid it'll leave, too convinced you didn't really earn it. That's what need does. It makes you feel like even the win isn't safe. So what's the way out? It starts with releasing the grip, not giving up, not detaching in some cold, lifeless way, but letting go of the story that says you're not whole unless something or someone comes along to complete you. Socrates once said, "He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have." Contentment isn't settling, it's power. It's the kind of stillness that makes room for what's real to enter. Because when you stop chasing, you start inviting. You stop gripping and you start receiving. There's a calm energy that emerges when you no longer need everything to go your way in order to feel okay. That calm doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful, because you're no longer reacting to life from fear. You're responding from trust. And that's the difference most people never learn. You don't attract peace by needing it. You attract peace by becoming the kind of person who doesn't panic in its absence. That's where things begin to shift, not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you stop getting in your own way. As Aristotle put it, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And when you start to see how your own need has been building your prison, you also see the door. The door is present openness, a willingness to let life flow instead of trying to script every scene. You don't lose your ambition, you just stop making your worth depend on its timeline. You don't stop wanting love, you just stop confusing attention with affection. You don't stop dreaming, you just stop believing that the dream has to come true this week, or else you're not enough. And in that space, life changes, not because you demanded more, but because you finally made space for it. Space for what fits your soul, not just your ego. Space for joy that doesn't come with strings. Space for stillness that feels safe. The less you need, the more you receive. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally remembered you were whole all along. Think about it. When you convince yourself that you have to get it, the job, the response, the approval, just to feel okay, your whole system goes into survival mode. You tense up, you overthink every move. You start second-guessing yourself, wondering if you're saying too much or not enough. You begin giving more than you have, pouring energy into places that don't pour back. You chase conversations that were never meant to hold you. You check your phone like it owes you peace. And each time it stays silent, you don't just feel ignored, you feel invisible. But here's the twist. No one tells you. The universe doesn't respond to your desperation, it responds to your energy. And when your energy is full of anxiety, panic, and lack, life mirrors it back. The more you try to force something to happen, the more you create resistance. And the more resistance you build, the more everything starts to slip out of reach. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're holding on too tightly. When you're gripping that hard, nothing can breathe around you. Not love, not clarity, not the opportunities you're hoping for. It's like trying to catch water with a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the less you hold. Because what's meant for you doesn't survive in an atmosphere of fear. It doesn't bloom in a space of tension. It only flows toward stillness, toward calm, quiet, open hands that are ready to receive, not desperate to control. And that shift, it's not something loud or dramatic. It starts in the moment you stop chasing and start trusting. Ever finally get what you were begging for, only to feel more insecure once it arrives? You get the job you prayed for, and suddenly you're doubting whether you deserve it. Every task feels like a test. Every meeting feels like a trap. You were so sure that this was the thing that would bring you peace. But now you're restless, looking over your shoulder, wondering how long it will last. Or maybe it's a text. That person you couldn't stop thinking about finally responds, and instead of relief, there's tension. You reread their words, scan for hidden meanings, overanalyze their tone. You're not enjoying the connection. You're preparing for it to disappear. This is what happens when you receive from a place of need. You don't truly receive. You grasp. You hold on too tightly. You stop breathing around it because you're scared that if you let your guard down, it'll vanish. The thing that was supposed to make you feel whole ends up making you feel even more fragile. And it's not because the thing itself is wrong. It's the energy you brought into it. You weren't ready to receive with openness. You were looking to fill a hole. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When we operate from need, we don't realize it's often a reaction to some deeper wound. We think the job, the partner, the praise is what we need. But really, what we're starving for is inner peace, stability, self-worth. So when the external thing arrives, it can't fully land because we're still looking to it to fix something that was never its job to fix. And here's where it gets even more real. When you grip the outcome, when you try to control every moment of it, you turn the gift into pressure. What once felt like a blessing starts to feel like a burden. The joy fades, replaced by anxiety. Now you're not grateful. It's not enough. You're not relaxed. You're on edge. And this cycle repeats, not because you don't get what you want, but because you haven't yet learned how to hold what you receive without fear. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. That kind of reflection isn't just philosophical, it's practical. When you pause and notice how much of your tension comes from the fear of loss, you start to see how that fear keeps you from actually living. You weren't born to chase moments just to lock them in a cage. You were born to experience them, to feel them fully, to let them breathe. And that only happens when you stop needing them to complete you. Real receiving comes from stillness, from trust, from a grounded place that says, "I am enough with or without this." When you reach that place, everything shifts. You no longer need to control the outcome because you trust yourself to hold steady no matter what. The gift becomes lighter, the moment becomes richer. You no longer hoard experiences, you welcome them and you let them go too without falling apart. Plato taught that the greatest wealth is to live content with little. That doesn't mean you stop desiring. It means you stop building your identity on what arrives. You find your center within. And when something beautiful comes into your life, you hold it with grace, not fear. You honor it, but you don't worship it. You stay rooted. And from that space, what's truly meant for you begins to stay. Not because you held tighter, but because you no longer needed to. So what do? You stop grasping, you stop chasing, you stop running after every sign, every hint, every sliver of possibility, like it's your only shot at peace. Instead, you open your hands, you breathe, you let the moment settle without trying to force what comes next. Because here's the truth, most people never get taught. The less you need, the more life has space to deliver. Not because life suddenly becomes more generous, but because you become more open. There's no longer a wall of tension between you and what's trying to reach you. And that's not about pretending you don't care. It's not about giving up on your dreams or becoming numb to what you want. It's about letting go of the story that says, if I don't have this, I'm not enough. If this doesn't happen, I'll break. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. That's the shift. You stop putting your peace on things outside of you. Things that change, people that leave, plans that fall apart. You stop asking the world to prove your worth. And when that old story dissolves, something strange happens. You become magnetic, not because you're trying harder, not because you're doing more, but because you're no longer working against yourself. You've stopped trying to convince life to give you what you already are. Whole, ready, enough. And that kind of energy is rare. It's the kind that doesn't push, it doesn't chase, it simply invites. You start walking through life without begging it to notice you. You stop forcing doors open. You stop knocking on windows that were never meant to be yours. And instead, life begins to come to you. The opportunities that match your peace. The people who recognize your depth. The experiences that feel like alignment, not survival. Aristotle once said, "Happiness depends upon ourselves." And that's exactly what starts to become clear. You're not waiting for permission to feel content. You're not waiting for a green light from the universe to believe in yourself. You're living in a way that says, whether it comes or not, I know who I am. That's where your power lives. Not in how loud you shout, but in how still you can be when the world is silent. Letting go of need doesn't make you weaker. It makes you wiser. It teaches you to stay centered in your own value instead of outsourcing it to people, outcomes, or timelines. And from that place, calm, grounded, quietly sure of who you are, you don't just attract more, you receive it fully. You enjoy it. You hold it with ease instead of fear. Plato believed that the measure of a man is what he does with power. But I'd add, the real power is when you no longer need anything to feel powerful. That's when things start to shift. That's when the world begins to respond, not to your fear, but to your stillness, because you're no longer chasing, you're inviting, you're not grasping anymore, you're just ready. Ask yourself this. When you say you want something, what's really driving that desire? Is it inspiration or is it fear? Are you reaching for love because you feel full and ready to share it, or because you're terrified of being alone? Are you chasing success because you're excited to grow, or because a voice inside keeps whispering that you're not enough without a title, without a win? This is where it gets honest, because on the surface, everything might look the same. The ambition, the effort, the goals. But underneath, there's a massive difference. The energy behind your actions changes everything. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." If you never examine what's fueling your pursuit, you'll keep thinking life is just being unfair, when really it's just reflecting your inner world back at you. The universe doesn't respond to your carefully chosen words. It responds to your state, your posture, your tone. And when the engine behind what you're doing is panic, you'll keep creating experiences that match that panic. You might get the job, but feel like you're constantly proving yourself. You might enter the relationship, but always feel like you're one bad day away from being left. Panic doesn't build peace, it builds pressure. But when your energy is calm, when you're moving from a place of inner peace, something shifts. You don't stop wanting, you just stop demanding. You still desire connection, but you're not afraid of your own company. You still pursue excellence, but you're not trying to outrun shame. That's when alignment begins. That's when you start receiving in ways that feel natural, not forced. Plato said, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." And that self-mastery isn't about control over others. It's about understanding the roots of your own behavior. It's about noticing when you're trying to earn love through performance, or trying to outrun your fear with constant movement. When you catch yourself in that pattern and choose presence over panic, you take your power back. This isn't just philosophy, it's deeply practical. Because the difference between a life that flows and a life that constantly feels uphill often comes down to this: the quality of the energy behind what you want. Peaceful intention opens doors. desperate effort slams them shut. And it's not because life is cruel. It's because alignment can't be rushed. It's recognized. It's received. So before you speak your goals out loud, pause for a moment, not to question them, but to feel the engine behind them. If it's fear, tend to that first. If it's emptiness, start there. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And when you know yourself deeply, you start creating from love, not lack. You start building from fullness, not hunger. And the things that come from that place, they don't just arrive, they stay. You've been taught to grind harder, push more, hustle until it hurts. The world keeps repeating the same message. Success belongs to those who outwork everyone else. And sure, effort matters. Discipline has its place. But at some point, all that pressure to make it happen starts working against you. You're moving, yes, but often from tension, not trust. And it shows. What if the real shift isn't about doing more? What if it's about doing less, but from the right place? Less overthinking, less proving, less bending over backward to be accepted, picked, validated. You don't realize how much of your energy goes into trying to earn space you already deserve. You perform in conversations, manage your image, replay your actions like you're on trial for being human. That's the cost of need. It steals your presence. And when you lose presence, you lose your power. Socrates once said, to find yourself, think for yourself. But when you're caught in the loop of constantly needing to be seen, heard, or approved of, you forget how to think for yourself. You start living as a version that pleases others, not the one that reflects your truth. And all that effort, it starts to feel hollow. But something beautiful happens when you let go of that need. When you stop performing and start just being. You show up differently. You speak more softly, but every word carries weight. You move slower, but everything around you begins to align. You're not chasing connection, and yet people feel drawn to you. That's not magic, that's presence. And presence doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it just is. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you can't become who you truly are if you're constantly twisting yourself into knots, trying to be what the world wants. When you stop needing to be seen, ironically, you become impossible to ignore. People sense that something's different. You're calm, grounded. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't panic when plans shift. Your energy no longer leaks from a place of lack. You walk into a room and don't need to explain yourself. Your peace does the talking, not because you're trying to impress, but because you're no longer impressed by performance. You're steady, present, and that presence says something louder than words. I'm not here to prove, I'm here to be. Aristotle believed that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. But pleasure disappears when you're constantly obsessed with results, when every step is just a means to a goal. You forget to live inside the step, but when you're no longer ruled by the need for outcomes, the process becomes enjoyable again. You don't just chase growth, you begin to love the becoming. And that version of you, the one that shows up without panic, without masks, without pressure, is powerful. Not because they do more, but because they finally stopped doing what doesn't serve them. How many times have you said yes when your soul whispered no? Not because you wanted to, but because something inside you was scared to disappoint, scared to be alone, scared to walk away. You stayed in conversations that drained you. You smiled through situations that felt wrong. You convinced yourself that good enough was good enough, just to keep the peace, just to avoid the silence. You held on to relationships long past their expiration date. Not because they nurtured you, but because the idea of starting over felt unbearable. You kept replying to texts that made your chest tighten. You listened to half-hearted apologies and called them effort. You kept showing up for people who only showed up when it was convenient. And still, you told yourself, this is better than nothing. You settled not just once, but again and again, for jobs that dulled your spirit, for attention that came with conditions, for love that always left you guessing. And deep down, you didn't really believe that's all you deserved. But need is sneaky like that. It doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as logic, as patience, as realism. It convinces you that survival equals success, that holding on is brave, that half is safer than none. But here's the quiet truth. The less you need, the more you see. The more space you give yourself to breathe, the clearer it becomes. You begin to realize you never lacked options, you just lacked belief. Carl Jung once said, "We don't solve our problems, we outgrow them." And outgrowing doesn't happen when you're stuck in fear. It happens when you stop letting fear define what you're willing to accept. As your need fades, your clarity rises, not because you suddenly become cold or detached, but because you're finally grounded. You're no longer driven by panic or emptiness, you're led by peace. And from that place, the world looks different. What once felt like opportunity now looks like compromise. What once looked like love now feels like confusion. You start recognizing the difference between what your fear begged for and what your peace has been patiently waiting to receive. Plato wrote, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." And that beginning often starts the moment you say, "I no longer accept this just because it's here. I choose to wait for what's right. I choose stillness over noise, truth over comfort, wholeness over attention." Because the moment you stop needing scraps, you start expecting meals. You raise your standards, not out of ego, but out of alignment. And what's meant for you, really meant for you, won't require you to beg, shrink, or guess. It'll meet you where your peace begins. Detachment doesn't mean you stop wanting. It doesn't mean you let go of every dream or walk away from every desire. It simply means you no longer need the outcome to feel whole. You stop tying your peace to things you can't control. You stop believing that your worth depends on how something unfolds. You're not cold, you're calm, you're not careless, you're clear. And that clarity, it holds a kind of quiet power. It attracts what chasing never could. When you stop pushing, stop begging, stop trying to force what isn't ready, you create space. Space for the right things to find you. Not the rushed ones, not the ones that ask you to lose yourself just to keep them, but the ones that recognize your peace and rise to meet it. You're no longer trying to convince anyone of your value. You don't have to. You've stepped out of the proving game completely. You're not obsessed with timelines anymore, or whether someone texted back in 5 minutes or 5 hours. You're not forcing closure just to feel finished. You've made peace with what's still unfolding, and that's not weakness, that's strength. Carl Jung said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness." In the same way, real peace isn't about perfection. It's not about having everything figured out. It's about learning to stand still in the middle of the unknown without losing your balance. From that stillness, something beautiful begins to happen. You become available, not desperate, not overextended, just available. For alignment, not chaos. For love that doesn't make you guess. For friendships that don't leave you drained. For decisions that don't keep you up at night, wondering if you betrayed yourself just to belong. That availability is what changes everything. It shifts the way you walk into a room. You're not searching anymore. You're not scanning for signs or approval or any tiny clue that you're okay. You're already okay, and because of that, you're no longer in your own way. The tension's gone, the struggle dissolves. Plato once said, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little." And while the world screams at you to need more, want more, do more, There's something timeless about learning to need less, to return to yourself, to find joy, not in what lands, but in how you hold yourself while waiting. That's where life starts to flow, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped resisting it. So what happens when you let go of need? You don't end up with less, you actually start receiving more. Not because you begged for it, not because you pushed or performed your way into being worthy, but because you finally trusted yourself enough to wait, to sit in the unknown without rushing to fix it, to stop chasing what wasn't choosing you and start listening for what was. You realize something powerful in that stillness. Your wholeness was never out there. It wasn't in the offer letter. It wasn't in the perfect reply. It wasn't waiting in someone else's love. It was buried under all the gripping, all the trying, all the noise you made trying to prove you mattered. When you strip that noise away, what's left is something steady, something real. And that version of you, the grounded one, that's the one life starts to notice. Not the desperate version that clings to every maybe. Not the exhausted one that performs just to be picked. But the version that says with quiet certainty, if it's for me, it will come. If it's not, I'll still be whole. That kind of energy doesn't scream. It doesn't try to convince. It doesn't race anyone to the finish line. It waits. It trusts. It carries peace like armor. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And when you let go of need, you stop fighting. You stop resisting your current season. You stop struggling to rewrite the past or predict the future. You start building the present. You start becoming someone who isn't shaken by delays, by silence, by detours, because you're no longer trying to escape yourself. That kind of presence is rare. It's magnetic, not because it tries to be, but because it simply is. And in a world full of noise and grasping, your stillness becomes a lighthouse, not just for others, but for the life that's been trying to find you. The life that doesn't want your panic, it wants your peace. So remember this, you were never meant to beg for what already belongs to you. Let go of the grip and let life meet you in your stillness. If this spoke to something real inside you, there's another video waiting on the screen that will take you even deeper. Give it your time. Your peace is worth that much. Thank you for being here and for being a part of Stoic Journal. Come back when you need clarity or when the world gets loud. We'll be here, quiet, steady, and always real.